Questions of Doom.
Welcome to another Questions of Doom. In this series, I, as ever, attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the channel homepage, but also as will be appearing at the end of this fine video. Now, in answering these questions online, I hope, or rather via video, I hope to not only have the person who asks the question find the answer useful, but also, more often than not, these questions are floating around anyway, and therefore may be useful to other people out there in YouTube land. Now, today's question is a frequently asked question, an FAQ, so I figured that I would bundle them all up and talk about the general issues involved, and that is to do with pay in archaeology, and also the state of archaeology as a sector at the moment, in terms of job security, that kind of thing. Now, the funny thing is, obviously, this will only really apply to Britain and the UK, but I'm fairly certain that this information, this outlook, will probably reflect the state of affairs in other countries as well. So these figures may not apply, but I'm sure you may find the information useful in some way. So don't lose interest too quickly. Yes, I'm going to don my my thinking person's hat. There we go. Let's see. Will it fit? Yes, perfect. Yeah, not bad, not bad. So, let's talk about the state of affairs of archaeology. Well, first of all, archaeology, I remember a couple of years ago I read an article which was discussing the place of archaeology in the academic sphere. So, in the context of people wanting to go to university, it was asking whether or not archaeology is worthwhile doing. And it had a curious finding. It said two things. It said, first of all, that yes, archaeologists often do get paid quite a lot of money. But that's because they don't work in archaeology. Archaeologists and archaeology actually develops skills which are very useful for other sectors. Analytical skills, mathematical skills, philosophical skills, interpersonal relationship skills, and obviously speaking skills, and that these skills can be transferred to other sectors and therefore earn people quite a bit of money. It also, though, said that it was a bit of a double-edged sword, because archaeology itself does not earn you much money. It said archaeology is a labour of love. That's the direct quote. And if you want to stay in archaeology, then you're going to have to accept that you won't be earning as much as your colleagues who go to work in the city, or be a lawyer, or possibly a banker of some sort. So it was with some trepidation that I read that, and I thought, well, I want to be an archaeologist, so I'll just stick at it. So I did. And I then sailed into a world which was rapidly changing. And this is revealed actually through a survey which was taken by the Institute of Field Archaeologists in 2007 and 2008. Now, the Institute of Field Archaeologists is an institute which is well worth, or institution rather, which is well worth looking up. So if you haven't, please do, feel free to, because they're absolutely worth being a member of, and certainly worth keeping up with their newsletters, that kind of thing. However, they every few years they actually commission a survey of archaeologists working in Britain in order to try and ascertain the state of the profession. And in 2006, between 2007 and 2008, their survey was done, and obviously that coincided with some other things happening in the world, but we'll come back to that in a moment or two. So in 2007, there were 6,865 professional archaeologists working in Britain. These are people who are working in a profession which is something to do, or directly to do, with archaeology, heritage, museums, that kind of thing. Now, of that 6,865, that figure had been growing by 4% per annum for 10 years. So between 1997 and 2007, the figure of people working in archaeology have been going up by 4% every year. In 2007 as well, 93% of all work in archaeology was being provided by the planning, through planning processes. This means that 93%, almost all work of an archaeological nature in Britain, was being provided by councils or businesses, people wishing to make a change to the world around them, to the environment, which might affect archaeology, and therefore needed an archaeologist to be involved, to say, do a watching brief, or maybe excavate before a building goes up. So almost all of the work was being provided essentially by the private sector. More than half of all archaeologists working in Britain at the time were working in the commercial sector. Now, the commercial sector is a part of a traditional dichotomy between academic and commercial archaeology. So an academic archaeologist is one who's often a professor or a student who's doing it for a paper or possibly for the love of the subject, and they'll be being paid, but the research itself isn't necessarily going to be published for the purposes of a building project. Commercial archaeology, more often than not, is working for to a deadline for a building project of some sort, and the grey document, the publication itself, will be given to councils, businesses who are involved, etc., etc., and it's much more of a commercial venture. They're being paid to produce something to enable something else to happen. So that's the dichotomy. And at the time, more than half were working for the commercial sector as opposed to the academic sector. Now, obviously, in 2007-2008, something massive happened, and that was the economic downturn, the global issues which occurred and which we're still living with today. Now, before this occurred, and actually, interestingly enough, the survey itself happened on the week that the term credit crunch entered the British vocabulary, which is quite interesting. But when it occurred, the report was actually fairly positive, and it was saying that archaeology is on a growth spurt at the moment, and that we can look forward to future years of prosperity and continuing growth. And at the time, at this growth period, the figures given for earnings were thus: the average, the mean wage for all archaeologists working in Britain was between £20,000 and £25,000 per year. The median, the middle value on the whole spectrum of wages, was £14,200 per year, and the mode, the most frequently occurring value on that spectrum, was between £13,000 and £14,000. So, in summary, not terribly good to begin with. And this was at the height. This was when everything was going grand and things looked great for the future. Now, in 2009, there was a rapid survey to update some of the data which had been gathered in 2007, because it was very clear that that was going to be an anomalous year, especially in light of things which were unfolding and have continued to unfold now. This rapid survey came with some fairly unsurprising finds. In 2009, between October and December, 345 jobs were lost in the archaeology sector in Britain. Now, to put that into context, that equates to roughly 1 in 12, or approximately 5% of all archaeology jobs in the country had been lost in that very short space at the back end of 2009. Since then, more data has been gathered, suggesting that archaeologists have suffered greatly. Roughly 1/3 of all jobs have been lost, apparently, or been renegotiated, and roughly 80% of jobs in the commercial sector have been either lost or severely affected by the economic situation. What this boils down to is that things have changed dramatically. What was already a bit of a squeezed sector has become positively constricted by a lack of development work. Essentially, this 93% figure in 2006-2007 for archaeology depending on new developments, well, the economy went bust, so there's no more buildings really happening, or there haven't been all that many, and therefore archaeology work has slumped. The funny thing is, as well, is that we're not even talking about people who are accustomed to working for long periods of time for the same person. The average contract in 2007 lasted between 2 and 5 years. That was That was, again, over a full spectrum. Some people have jobs for life, other people are working on a week-by-week basis. Now, the average has dropped to roughly 6 months, between 6 months and a year, for those people who are left working in archaeology. What am I getting at here? Well, it all looks very, very gloomy, does it not? I've certainly had my moments when I've thought this is a very gloomy outlook. And for those of you who are asking this question because you're thinking, "Oh, should I get into archaeology because to make money?" Well, the answer is probably not. You probably shouldn't get into archaeology to make money because at the moment archaeology is not a growth sector, and if anything, it's on a bit of a shrink. Things are looking up a little bit now. I can certainly say that here in the northeast of England, actually, there have been a slight increase in development work. But certainly nothing amazing. And actually, you've also got to bear in mind that all the people who lost their jobs in the past couple of years are still floating around and will probably try and go back to that kind of work. So you're in an increasingly competitive environment as well. What's the future? Well, that's a good question. The future is two things, probably. First of all, it's been suggested that the future of archaeology lies in more community work, and lies in more voluntary work. Now, this is controversial. It's controversial from my point of view because, well, frankly, we need to value the work that archaeologists put into their education in order to do quality work for you and for me and for the rest of the country. We can't just turn archaeology into a voluntary sector because ultimately not only will the quality of the archaeology suffer, but also what's the incentive to become a good archaeologist, to be thinking, to be working essentially at a degree and trying to apply these new ideas to the world when people are basically telling you that you're entering a voluntary sector. So I don't think that's a good way forward at all. In fact, I think it's a scary way forward, and it's a downright self-destructive way forward. The other alternative, and what is still occurring at the moment, is lobbying. Organisations like the Council for British Archaeology, the Institute of Field Archaeologists, and actually even campaigns such as the Mortimer campaign, which of late I've been involved in, are organisations who try and highlight the importance of archaeology, the way that archaeology has suffered disproportionately in this economic climate, but also as well the need to value archaeology as a profession and the need to make sure that people have an incentive to enter that profession. Otherwise, archaeology will dwindle, it'll disappear, and you'll be left with people who either do it as a hobby, which is absolutely fine, or people who, worse still, are allowed to say and do whatever they want, essentially, in archaeology. It will become corrupt. It will become extremely difficult to trust the work that's being done, because you won't know to what standard it's been done. So I suppose that's really the summary, actually, is that archaeology is on a bit of a downturn. It has been squeezed and squashed and suffering, and there have been lots of calls of late to make archaeology essentially a hobby, a profession which is a hobby, but it's too important for that, I would argue. And I would say that so long as people are interested in going into the profession, such as the fine people who asked this very question, we owe it to them and indeed to ourselves, and frankly I owe it to myself as a guy who'd like to be paid properly to do archaeology, to continue to lobby about archaeology and its value for the world, for humanity, essentially. It is a limited resource. It's like oil, and no one would ever say that well, let's not pay much for oil. And the reason why I say this is that once oil's gone, oil's gone. It's the same for archaeology. Once it's gone, it's gone. And so what you want is the best people working at the equivalent of oil rigs, working on archaeological sites, getting this information and making sure that we don't just dismiss our heritage, our past, essentially why we are who we are, purely and simply because we're feeling a bit of a squeeze in terms of the economy. So I shall take off my hat, my thinking person's hat, and essentially sum up by saying thank you for this question. This has been a very worthwhile question to answer, and hopefully I've painted a bit of a picture of the archaeological scene, the sector as it is and as it was, and hopefully where it's going to go next. If you want to help change this situation, if you want to help get involved with this, either here in Britain or wherever it is that you're living, you need to vocalise your concerns to your politicians around you, people who are in charge of policy making, people who are essentially in charge of where your money, your tax money, gets spent. But also, just not even your tax money, just where our values are as a society, and you need to highlight that this is important, and it's a one-off thing, and if we do let archaeology disappear, we may never get it back in the same way that we once had it. So I shall shut up now. As I say, the data itself, I think, speaks for itself. Archaeology has been suffering, and to be honest, didn't start out from the best position anyway. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? I certainly have strong thoughts about it, and if you want to share them, feel free to share them below. And I shall be quiet now. So thank you. Until next time. Bye bye.